June 17, 1944. Saipan. 4:23 a.m. The jungle was still, a silence so heavy it pressed against the eardrums. Dew dripped from the broad leaves, falling into the ash-laced mud where American boots had left their mark just hours before. In the distance, faint whispers, Japanese voices, echoed through the maze of ridges and caves carved into the volcanic rock. Then, the world erupted. A burst of orange light tore through the night. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't a grenade. It was something else, something alive. A column of liquid fire screamed across the darkness and vanished into the mouth of a cave. Seconds later, the cave answered with screams. The Marines had arrived with a new weapon, the M2 Flamethrower. Compact. Hissing. Terrifying. To the Japanese defenders, hidden in tunnels they believed invincible, it was as if the Americans had summoned hell itself. Inside those caves, the temperature soared past 1,000 degrees. The oxygen burned before the men could even shout. The smell of scorched earth mixed with gunpowder and the acrid sweetness of burning fuel. Some tried to crawl deeper into the tunnels. Others prayed. But there was no deeper, and no mercy. Private First Class Harold Red Jacobs of the 2nd Marine Division later wrote, "You didn't see the enemy. You just saw the fire. It crawled into places even grenades couldn't reach." From above, the jungle canopy lit up in waves, each cave glowing like an open furnace. The Americans called it, clearing the nests. The Japanese called it the death of the mountain. In the command bunker beneath Hill 500, Captain Saito of the Imperial Japanese Army watched the inferno spread through the valley below. He'd fought in China, seen artillery barrages that lasted days. But this was different. There was no rhythm, no pattern. Just sudden, screaming fire that devoured everything it touched. Inside those caves, the temperature soared past 1,000 degrees. The oxygen burned before the men could even shout. The smell of scorched earth mixed with gunpowder and the acrid sweetness of burning fuel. Some tried to crawl deeper into the tunnels. Others prayed. But there was no deeper, and no mercy. Private First Class Harold Red Jacobs of the 2nd Marine Division later wrote, "You didn't see the enemy. You just saw the fire. It crawled into places even grenades couldn't reach." From above, the jungle canopy lit up in waves, each cave glowing like an open furnace. The Americans called it, clearing the nests. The Japanese called it the death of the mountain. In the command bunker beneath Hill 500, Captain Saito of the Imperial Japanese Army watched the inferno spread through the valley below. He'd fought in China, seen artillery barrages that lasted days. But this was different. There was no rhythm, no pattern. Just sudden, screaming fire that devoured everything it touched. His men had built those tunnels for months, reinforced them with steel and concrete. They were supposed to be untouchable. And now, in minutes, they were glowing tombs. Saito turned to his aide. "It is not war," he whispered. "It is punishment." Above ground, the flamethrower teams advanced, 2 men per unit. One carried the 70-pound tank on his back, the other covered him with a rifle. They moved slowly, step by step, through the undergrowth, searching for the next black opening in the rock. Each breath tasted like gasoline. Each pull of the trigger spat 3 seconds of pure fire, 3 seconds that decided whether they lived or died. For the Marines, it was both power and horror. You could feel the heat even 30 feet away, Corporal Dean Morris remembered. And you'd wonder what it felt like on the other side, then you'd stop wondering. By sunrise, the valley of Saipan was a mosaic of smoke and silence. The machine guns had gone quiet. The caves no longer spoke. But this was only the beginning. Because the weapon that had turned Saipan into a furnace was about to meet a place even deadlier, an island where every inch of ground was a fortress, and every soldier had sworn to die before surrender. That island was called Iwo Jima. February 19, 1945. Iwo Jima. 7:10 a.m. The horizon burned with the rising sun, and with it came the largest amphibious invasion the Pacific had ever seen. From the decks of over 450 ships, the roar of naval artillery thundered like an unending storm. Each shell fell into the black volcanic rock, sending clouds of dust high into the air. But when the Marines finally landed, the firing stopped. Not because the Japanese had run out of ammunition, but because they were waiting. The defenders of Iwo Jima had built an underground city, 11 miles of tunnel, bunkers, and hidden firing positions carved deep beneath the surface. Major General Tadamaki Kurabayashi, the Japanese commander, had forbidden banzai charges. Instead, he designed a defense meant to bleed the Americans dry. His men would not fight for the beach. They would fight for every yard of ground, from below. And when the Marines advanced, the island itself seemed to open fire. Machine guns rattled from unseen holes. Mortars dropped from nowhere. Snipers vanished into smoke before a single bullet could reach them. The black sand gave way underfoot, swallowing boots, making every step a crawl through hell. The Americans soon realized the truth: Iwo Jima wasn't just defended. It was alive. By the second day, entire platoons had been pinned down by fire coming from tunnels they couldn't even locate. Grenades rolled into dark openings were simply kicked back. Rifle fire disappeared into the rock. The cave seemed endless, and so the order came down: bring in the flamethrowers. Sergeant William Tex Long carried one of the M2 units. To him, the weapon felt less like a gun and more like a living creature strapped to his back, breathing through twin steel cylinders of gasoline and nitrogen. He'd learned to treat it with both fear and respect. "You don't aim it," he said later. "You unleash it." Tex and his partner crawled toward a rocky outcrop where Japanese snipers had trapped 2 Marine squads for hours. The tunnels were invisible, hidden behind volcanic debris and scorched sandbags. Tex pressed his ear to the rock, faint whispers, metal scraping. They were there. Waiting. He steadied himself, yanked the igniter, and pulled the trigger. A torrent of flame burst forward, twisting in the wind like a living whip. It flowed into the cracks, the holes, the breathing spaces of the mountain. The air itself shimmered. Then came the roar, a deep, guttural sound like the earth itself screaming. Inside the tunnels, the pressure built faster than anyone could react. Fire consumed the oxygen. The heat turned rifle barrels into glowing rods. And the men who had once believed the mountain was their armor, were now its prisoners. Private Hiroshi Tanaka, one of Kurabayashi's engineers, wrote in his final letter, found months later, half-charred. "The mountain shakes. The air burns. The Americans carry the fire on their backs. We hide in stone, but the stone itself turns against us." As the days passed, the smell of burnt rock and fuel blanketed the island. Every cave had to be cleared by hand, one at a time, one burst of flame at a time. The Marines began calling it cave-to-cave combat. For every yard gained, dozens of lives were lost. And yet, the Japanese refused to break. At night, they emerged from the ashes, silent, covered in soot, launching counterattacks before vanishing again. It was as if the fire had only awakened something deeper inside them, a defiance that refused to die. By the 7th day, Tex had emptied his last tank. His arms trembled from exhaustion. The flamethrower was heavy now, its metal blackened from heat, its straps soaked in sweat and fuel. He looked out over the smoking ridges, where flames still flickered from cave mouths, and muttered, "They don't die easy. They burn, and they keep fighting." But deep within the mountain, beneath Mount Suribachi, General Kurabayashi still held his command post. And what the Americans didn't yet know, was that he was planning something that would make Iwo Jima's firestorm look like a spark. Beneath Mount Suribachi, the air was thick, part smoke, part silence. The tunnels trembled faintly from the bombardment above, yet within the command chamber, General Tadamaki Kurabayashi sat upright, his uniform dusted with ash, a calmness radiating from him that defied the chaos. He had studied in America before the war. He had seen Detroit, the factories, the power of industrial strength. And he knew, the Americans would come, wave after wave, armed not just with rifles, but with machines that turned fire into a weapon. Around him, officers reported one after another. Sector D has fallen, sir. Tunnel 19 is sealed by fire. Many wounded cannot be reached. Kuribayashi's reply was simple. Then they will die, Japanese soldiers. They will die where they stand. But there was something deeper in his tone, not arrogance, but sorrow. He knew the island was lost. What remained was honor, and the belief that every hour they held would bleed the enemy just a little more. Outside, the M2 Flamethrowers continued their grim advance. The sound was unmistakable, a whoosh that grew into a roar, followed by the muffled screams that echoed through stone. Marines moved in pairs, one with a flamethrower, the other with a rifle, protecting his partner as he unleashed liquid fire into the caves. Clear it, they'd shout. And the caves would light up like furnaces. Inside those tunnels, Japanese soldiers often faced death in complete darkness. Some chose to fight to the end. Others, realizing escape was impossible, took their own lives before the flames reached them. The stench of burning fuel and flesh fused with volcanic rock, it never truly left Iwo Jima. Private Hiroshi Tanaka's diary, recovered months after the battle, recorded the horror from inside. The walls drip fire. The ground moves. We hear their voices before the flame. They shout for us to surrender, but we cannot. We are trapped between duty and death. For the Americans, victory came inch by inch. Yet for every tunnel cleared, new ones were discovered. The island was a labyrinth, one that seemed designed to consume men. And then, something unexpected began to happen. As Marines stormed deeper into the interior, they started hearing something strange through the smoke. Voices, faint, echoing through the vents and crevices. Sometimes it was English. Sometimes Japanese. Sometimes it was their own voices, played back through the mountain. At first, they thought it was psychological, the mind's reaction to exhaustion and trauma. But several soldiers swore they heard their own orders, repeated seconds after speaking. Cover left. Cover left. Bouncing through the darkness, warped and hollow. The tunnels had become a living echo chamber, a cruel trick of acoustics and terror. The same caves that once protected Japanese soldiers were now whispering ghosts back to the men inside them. By the 10th day, Kuribayashi's radio was dead, his troops cut off in isolated pockets. Yet even as the island turned into a furnace, reports continued to come in, small groups of Japanese soldiers ambushing American engineers, emerging from smoke, firing, then disappearing again. They called them the Shadows. Men who refused to die, haunting every cave that had once sheltered them. And then came the day that burned everything. March 2, 1945. The Marines surrounded Suribachi's base tunnels and prepared for the final purge. Flamethrowers, satchel charges, and bulldozers, the trifecta of destruction. As Tex Long climbed the slope, the air shimmered from heat and diesel fumes. He looked down into a tunnel mouth, hearing movement, faint, slow breathing. He didn't pull the trigger right away. For a split second, he wondered, are they still alive down there? Then came the whisper, a voice from below, speaking English. You should not have come. Tex froze. The other Marines looked at each other, disbelief, fear. Then the tunnel erupted in flame. What they didn't know was that Kuribayashi had ordered his final counterattack, a suicide charge from below, a desperate last stand that would turn Iwo Jima's fire into legend. The mountain was about to explode, from both sides. March 3, 1945. Dawn. Smoke blanketed Iwo Jima like a second sky. The air shimmered orange, and every gust of wind carried the bitter scent of burned oil and human ash. The battle had lasted 13 days, but for those still alive inside the tunnels, time no longer existed, only fire and echo. General Kuribayashi stood in the last chamber beneath Mount Suribachi. Around him, barely 24 men remained, some wounded, some barely conscious. Their uniforms were torn, faces blackened with soot. He knew the Americans were above, preparing the final assault. He adjusted his sword, dusted off his gloves, and looked to his adjutant. "We have done all that can be done," he said quietly. "Now we show them how Japanese soldiers die." Outside, Sergeant Tex Long and his squad inched up the volcanic slope. The ground was hot enough to burn through boots, spent shell casings sank into molten ash. Behind them, engineers prepared the final push, satchel charges and M2 flamethrowers ready. Tex's hands shook as he reloaded the igniter. He'd burned through 5 tanks already. Each one heavier than the last. He could feel the heat even before pulling the trigger. The island seemed alive, pulsing, breathing. "Move up," came the order. "This is it." Then, from inside the mountain, came a sound no one expected. Singing. A low, haunting chorus, voices rising through the smoke. Japanese soldiers, their words muffled by stone, chanting a final war hymn. The melody echoed across the crater, carried by wind and flame. Every Marine froze. No one fired. For a few seconds, the battlefield went silent except for that song. Then, boom. The tunnels erupted. One after another, explosions tore through the mountain. Kuribayashi's final order: detonate the remaining munitions, deny the enemy his command post. The blast ripped open the slopes, sending plumes of smoke hundreds of feet into the sky. In the end, the M2 Flamethrower had done more than burn, it had changed the very idea of war in the jungle. Where once darkness had been protection, now it was a death trap. And for those who carried the fire, the memory never left. Years later, Tex would say in an interview, "You never forget that smell. You never forget the sound. You can win the ground, but you lose a part of yourself in the flame." He looked away, eyes distant. The camera zoomed in on the weathered lines of his face, silent, haunted. Because on Iwo Jima, even victory burned. March 3, 1945. The island of Iwo Jima burns beneath a sky that no longer remembers blue. Beneath Mount Suribachi, Japanese soldiers sing their final hymn, voices carried by smoke and silence. And above them, American Marines wait. Flamethrowers ready. Hearts pounding against their ribs like drums of war. Then, the mountain erupts. A blast so bright it steals the color from the sky. Fire swallows stone. Honor meets flame. And the island that once hid death, becomes death itself. Sergeant Tex Long crawls from the ash, his weapon broken, his eyes hollow. He looks out over what's left, and whispers. "You can win the ground, but you lose a part of yourself in the fire." And maybe that's what war really is. Not just men versus men. But humanity, fighting its own darkness. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button to stand with us on the next battlefield of forgotten history. Every week, we uncover the stories war tried to bury. The battles that changed men. And the moments that still haunt the silence.